Everything was going exactly as planned. The cameras were rolling, the families were laughing, and Steve Harvey was doing what he does best, making America smile. But then, from somewhere in the audience, a voice broke through the laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was something else entirely. Something that made Steve Harvey stop mid-sentence, lower his microphone, and do something he had never done in 30 years of television. He stopped the show. The studio fell silent. 300 people held their breath. The producers in the control room froze. Because what happened next wasn't in the script. It wasn't rehearsed. And it would become one of the most powerful moments in Family Feud history. This is the story of how one unexpected voice changed everything. It started like any other Tuesday taping at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The Johnson family from Memphis was competing against the Martinez family from San Antonio. Round 3. The scoreboard was tight. The energy was electric. Steve Harvey was in his element, cracking jokes, making faces, doing that signature walk he does when someone gives a ridiculous answer. Name something you might find in a woman's purse. Steve read from the card, that mischievous grin already forming on his face. Marcus Johnson, a truck driver with a nervous smile, hit the buzzer first. "A hammer!" he shouted confidently. The audience erupted in laughter. Steve did his classic double take, looked at the camera, looked back at Marcus, and shook his head with that expression that said, "Did this man really just say that?" "A hammer," Steve repeated slowly, drawing out every syllable for comedic effect. "Marcus, my brother, what kind of women are you dating?" More laughter. The kind that fills the studio and makes everyone forget their problems for a moment. This was Family Feud at its finest. Pure, unfiltered joy. But in the third row of the audience, someone wasn't laughing. Steve Harvey had been doing this long enough to sense when something was off. And something was definitely off. Her name was Catherine Morrison. 63 years old. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. Wearing a blue cardigan that had seen better days. She sat perfectly still while everyone around her roared with laughter. Her hands were folded in her lap, clutching a small envelope. Her eyes were fixed on Steve Harvey, but they weren't seeing the comedian. They were seeing something, or someone, else entirely. The game continued. The Martinez family took control of the board. More answers, more laughter, more of Steve Harvey's legendary reactions. But every few seconds, his eyes would drift back to that woman in the third row. The one who wasn't smiling. All right, Steve said, turning back to the Johnson family. "We need 5 points to win this round. Marcus, I'm gonna give you one more chance to redeem yourself after that hammer situation." The audience laughed again. Steve grinned, waiting for the next question card. But then he heard it. A voice. Quiet but clear. Cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Please!" Steve's head turned. The smile froze on his face. "Please, Mr. Harvey." The audience started to quiet down, one section at a time, like dominoes falling. People turned to look. The cameras, trained on Steve, caught the exact moment his expression changed from entertainer to human being. Catherine Morrison was standing now. The envelope still clutched in her hands. Tears streaming down her face. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice breaking. "It's about my grandson." The studio went completely silent. Steve Harvey lowered his microphone. He looked at the floor director, at the producers behind the glass, at the families standing at their podiums. Then he looked back at Catherine. And he made a decision. "Hold on," Steve said quietly. Then louder to everyone. Hold on. We're gonna stop for a second." He walked off the stage. Not toward the control room. Not toward the exit. He walked directly into the audience, straight to the third row, straight to Catherine Morrison. The cameras followed him. They always follow Steve Harvey. But this time, they captured something different. Something real. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Television shows run on tight schedules. Every second is accounted for. Every segment timed to the minute. Stopping a live taping? That's a producer's nightmare. It costs money. It throws off the entire day's schedule. The other families waiting backstage, the crew that needs to move on to the next segment, everything grinds to a halt. But Steve Harvey wasn't thinking about any of that. He reached Catherine Morrison and gently took her hand. "Talk to me," he said softly. "What's going on?" Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper, but the studio microphones caught every word. "My grandson David. He's 12 years old. He's been battling leukemia for 3 years." She paused, struggling to continue. "Last week, the doctors told us there's nothing more they can do. He has maybe 2 months." The audience gasped. Several people in the front rows started crying. Steve Harvey, the man who makes millions laugh every single day, stood perfectly still. His hand never left Catherine's. "David's dream," Catherine continued. "His only dream was to meet you. To be here. But he's too sick to travel. He's in the hospital in Pittsburgh. And I came here because—" She held up the envelope with trembling hands. "Because he asked me to give you this." Steve took the envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He just held it, as if weighing not just the paper but the entire moment. "What's your grandson's name again?" Steve asked gently. "David. David Morrison." Steve nodded slowly. Then he turned to the audience, to the cameras, to everyone watching. "You know what?" he said, his voice stronger now but thick with emotion. "We're gonna do something different today. We're gonna make sure David knows that he's not alone. That we see him. That he matters." He opened the envelope. Inside was a child's handwriting on lined notebook paper. The kind of paper every kid uses in school. Steve unfolded it carefully and began to read silently. His jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. The entire studio waited. Finally, Steve looked up. "David wrote me a letter," he said to the audience. "He says he watches Family Feud every single day. That when he's in pain, when he's scared, when the treatments make him sick, he watches this show and it makes him forget. For just a little while, it makes him forget." Steve had to stop. He turned away from the cameras for a moment, collecting himself. When he turned back, there were tears openly running down his face. "He says the thing he loves most is when I make people laugh. When I bring families together. When I show people that no matter what answer they give, they're still valued, they're still loved, they're still part of something bigger." The audience was openly weeping now. The Martinez family had left their podium and were standing closer, holding each other. The Johnson family was doing the same. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Steve Harvey took off his jacket. The beautiful, perfectly tailored suit jacket that's part of his signature look. The jacket that probably cost more than most people make in a month. He folded it carefully and handed it to Catherine Morrison. "I want you to take this to David," Steve said. "I want you to tell him that this is the jacket I was wearing the day his grandmother stopped the whole show. The day she made 300 people and millions of viewers understand what courage really looks like." Catherine clutched the jacket to her chest, sobbing. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to the audience. "How many of y'all want to send David a message right now?" Every single hand went up. 300 people standing, some of them strangers just minutes ago, now united in this moment. "All right then," Steve said, wiping his eyes. He looked directly into the camera. "David Morrison, if you're watching this from that hospital room in Pittsburgh, I want you to know something, young man. You are stronger than I will ever be. You are braver than anyone in this studio. And you have taught me something today that I needed to learn." He paused, making sure every word landed. "You taught me that laughter isn't just about forgetting our pain. It's about remembering our humanity. It's about connecting with each other in the middle of the storm. And son, you are not alone in your storm. You've got your grandmother, who loves you so much she traveled across the country to deliver your letter. You've got this audience. You've got these families. And you've got me. Steve reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. His personal business card. He wrote something on it and gave it to Catherine. That's my direct number, he said. You call me. Tonight. Tomorrow. Whenever David wants to talk. Whenever you need to talk. You hear me? This doesn't end when the cameras stop rolling. The audience erupted. Not in applause, not yet. In something deeper. A collective release of emotion that transcended entertainment and touched something profoundly human. The floor director was making frantic gestures, trying to get things back on schedule. But Steve Harvey held up his hand. We're not done yet, he said. He turned to both families still standing at their podiums. Marcus, Carlos, come here for a second. The team captains approached hesitantly. Steve put one arm around each of them. Here's what we're gonna do, Steve said. We're gonna finish this game. We're gonna crown a winner. But whatever that family wins today, we're splitting it. Half goes to the winning family, like always. The other half goes to the Morrison family to help with David's medical expenses. Both captains nodded immediately. No hesitation. No discussion needed. And one more thing, Steve added, looking at the audience. Anybody here who wants to contribute, who wants to help this family, there's gonna be information at the end of this episode. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The game resumed, but it was different now. Everything was different. The Johnson family won. They celebrated, but it wasn't the usual jumping and screaming celebration. It was quieter. More meaningful. They immediately walked over to Catherine Morrison and embraced her. After the taping ended, after the audience filed out, after the cameras stopped rolling, Steve Harvey did something else. He called the hospital in Pittsburgh. He spent 45 minutes on the phone with David Morrison, a 12-year-old boy he'd never met, talking about everything and nothing. About superheroes and baseball and what it's like to host a TV show. About hope. The producers uploaded the footage that same night. No editing. No cutting for time. The raw, unfiltered moment in its entirety. Within 12 hours, it had been viewed 23 million times. The donations poured in. Enough to cover David's medical expenses and his family's bills for the next year. Enough to fund experimental treatments that the insurance company had denied. Enough to give a family drowning in debt a chance to breathe. But more than the money, something else happened. Letters arrived at the studio. Thousands of them. From people with sick children. From people caring for aging parents. From people facing their own battles with cancer, with grief, with loss. All of them saying the same thing. Thank you for showing us we're not alone. David Morrison lived longer than the doctors predicted. Not 2 months, but 7. 7 more months of watching Family Feud. 7 more months of wearing Steve Harvey's jacket, the one his grandmother brought home that day, the one that still smelled faintly of cologne and camera lights and hope. When David passed away on a quiet morning in March, Steve Harvey flew to Pittsburgh for the funeral. He didn't publicize it. Didn't bring cameras. He just came. He sat with the Morrison family. He held Catherine's hand the same way he did that day in the studio. At the service, Steve stood up to speak. He told everyone about the letter. About the moment the show stopped. About how a 12-year-old boy taught a 60-year-old man what really matters. David's letter is framed in my dressing room, Steve said. I look at it before every single taping. And it reminds me why I do this. Not for the ratings. Not for the paycheck. But because sometimes, if we're lucky, we get to be part of someone's light in their darkest hour. He paused, looking at the small casket with its blanket of flowers. David, you were my light, buddy. Thank you. Back at the Family Feud studio, something changed after that day. The show was still funny. Steve Harvey still made people laugh until they cried. But there was something else now. A depth. An awareness. A recognition that behind every contestant, every audience member, every viewer at home, there's a story. There's a battle. There's a David. Steve started doing something new. At the end of certain episodes, after the confetti fell and the winners were crowned, he would look directly into the camera and say, "If you're going through something today, and I know some of y'all are, I want you to remember what we just witnessed here. We saw people come together. We saw strangers become family. We saw that laughter and tears can exist in the same moment. And we saw that you don't have to face your storm alone." The jacket, Steve's jacket, was returned to him after David's funeral. Catherine insisted. But Steve couldn't bring himself to wear it again. Instead, he donated it to the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where it now hangs in a display case in the cancer ward. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "David Morrison's Dream." A reminder that when we stop to listen, when we dare to break protocol, when we choose humanity over schedule, we discover what really matters. Steve Harvey stopped a show that day. But what he really did was start a movement. A reminder that television isn't just about entertainment. It's about connection. It's about seeing each other. It's about the moments when we dare to stop, look someone in the eyes, and say, "I hear you. I see you. You matter." And sometimes, that's the most powerful show of all.